And next, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Danya Cunningham. Danya is Executive Director of Community Innovators Lab, aka the CoLab at MIT. And she's the board member of the Deposing Institute. Her CoLab focuses on empowering communities at the margins, from co-creating just urban economics in the Bronx to working with communities in Latin America on equitable development. Danya is directly addressing the challenges of urban sustainability. Please join me in a very warm welcome for Danya Cunningham as she comes to the stage.
Good morning. I want to start, can you hear me? I want to start by paying tribute to this land, this place that the Ho-Chunk have called Tija since time immemorial. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself and be honest that I'm talking today about some new work that I've been doing with colleagues in the Pacific region of Colombia. So I'm talking today about things that I actually haven't spoken about a lot out loud. And I'm hoping that we can learn some stuff together. So I'm a civil rights lawyer by training, and I practiced in the Deep South in the US, and I left the practice of law because I realized I was too angry. I was always looking for conflict and always fighting. And I decided that I wanted another route. I had had my first child. I was looking at this baby thinking, what's his life going to be like? With me as his mom. And so I decided I wanted to go another route. And I'm telling you this because I still really deeply believe in anger. I want to say that, and it's hard in spaces where there's a lot of conversation about well-being and right relationships to also talk about anger. It's the skunk at the garden party. And when you are the person who walks into the room in a black body talking about anger, then it's really bad, right? So I wanna create space for us to talk about that. And so two conversations I've had with my kids lately. One is about in this moment when anger is the base note of so much, trying to step back a little bit from anger. And my kids, when I told them that I was making a presentation here and I was going to talk about stepping back from anger while still deeply believing in it, he said, don't let the white folks, my older son said, don't let the white folks off the hook. But he also, and I sort of stepped back and I said, wow, you're angry. And he said, what did you expect? You raised me. And so I want us to make space for the anger. And I want to talk about the work that we are doing in the Pacific because our colleagues there who are leading that work, who are extraordinary leaders, are navigating this extraordinary space between anger and love. And so that's really what I want to talk about. So, technology is not my best friend. I'm going to try this. So just starting with the basics. Yeah, I think so. Oh, okay. Okay, so this is what I'm hoping we talk about today. And this is, I'm hoping we get a chance to do a little interactive stuff and thank you for starting with journaling and dialogue. We'll do more of that, hopefully. So that'll be the last part, the interactive. I usually start with the personal and interactive and move to the more general and sort of intellectual. I'm doing it the reverse today, again, because there's some new ideas that I want to just put in front of you and see what you think. Okay. No big surprise here. Yeah? That somehow we, as a society, keep collectively recreating environmental disaster and inequality and human despair, and it seems like it's the system and nobody really knows how to get a hold of it. How many people here are familiar with Theory U and Presencing? I love it. Wow, okay, cool. Okay. So the three divides that just keep sort of inexorably driving us to something that is not good for the planet or people or communities. And at CoLab, we think a lot about this idea of disruptive moments of change. When something major happens in a place and the economic, social arrangements are disrupted. And it means both that there's an opportunity for innovation, but also the risk of marginality grows. And so the work at CoLab, and so this is just one example where there are these tensions and potential realignments, and who has the capacity to move the system, to move the stakeholders within the system, are usually the ones who sort of prevail. And so CoLab works with communities at the margins using the planning discipline to kind of put a few more beans on the scale on the side of the communities who face institutional failure, who therefore understand the impacts deeply and have a lot of ideas about how to change institutions. So that's the question we're often asking ourselves. And it seems like this is the question you guys are asking yourselves. So this is us. We use three main instrumentalities. We are in the planning department at MIT, and so we use participatory planning as the discipline in contexts where development is at issue. A key mode for us is linking stakeholders throughout the system, and in Theory U, we think about coordination and communication so that and seeing so that the system can sense and see itself. Is that familiar to you guys? Yeah? Okay. And then we work with communities to create practical projects that have the potential for wealth creation. And for us, wealth is, we once did in one of our development studies, we cataloged like, I don't know, 15 different kinds of wealth, from cultural patrimony to undeveloped ground sites. And we use Theory U. So the basic idea of Theory U, it is, for those of you who don't know, it is an awareness-based systems change practice. And the core insight of Theory U is this, that if you can turn your attention to your own intention, you will be much more effective as a leader, and you will open up space for change. Here's the case. The case is in Colombia's Pacific region. Is anybody familiar with the Pacific region of Colombia? Hi, Rebecca. So this is the Afro region of Colombia. It is 90% Afro-descendant, and it is culturally, in my experience, the most African place I've ever been outside of Africa. And it is a place that is both, oh yeah, let me go forward for a minute. Yeah, this is where I want to go. It is a place that is both profoundly rich in terms of cultural and natural resources. Indigenous and Afro cultures are incredibly strong and a source of innovation and survival. This is actually a mural at one of the local colleges. And I probably can't, well, yeah. So it talks about the power, the strength, the intelligence of women as a force for making a more just and equal society. And there's also great intelligence about the natural environment. And in the Pacific region, people do not separate out their Afro identity from their connection to the land and territory. It's something coming from the suburbs of New York, which is where I come from, that was entirely strange to me, but extraordinary. And here's the other side. It is a place of just cruel structural violence and dispossession for generations. And in particular, over the last decades, armed conflict. So in 2014, we started work there with young leaders. And our work was around entrepreneurship for development and territorial innovation. And that is the term that our colleagues use. Because so much of the force of innovation there is tied to territory and identity. And so this idea of entrepreneurship for territorial innovation was a really important driver. Fast forward. Oh, I'm done. 2016, sorry. 2016 were the peace accords. You guys remember when the peace accords were signed? And it was meant as a moment for demobilization of combatants and a new development era. But, and that, from the CoLab perspective, was a disruptive moment where economic, social, political, cultural arrangements were open to shifting. But because of the profound racism and structural violence, there was never major thought given to addressing the basic needs of the region. And so combatants were demobilized, just sent back to communities without jobs, in a place where infrastructure is really compromised. And of course, the violence continued. And the big forces, the organized forces that had signed the peace accord just fractured, and there were small criminal bands created around the region, and the violence and really the terror continues. And so the community had had enough, and in two of the major cities in the Pacific, Quito and Buenaventura, there were civic strikes. Buenaventura is the largest deepwater port in the country, and despite that, for years there was no infrastructure development to the port and in the port beyond. It's a state-of-the-art facility, but you get 10 blocks beyond the port, people don't have water or reliable electricity all day. And so they were, the national government proposed a large infrastructure development project. And as a justification or rationale for the project, they put together a development study that outlined in great detail the statistics, the poverty statistics in the region, in the city, and then put forward a plan that was going to continue to extract wealth and not address any of the basic needs. And the community said, do you think we don't see this? Do you think we don't understand what's going on here? These statistics show why we need infrastructure development in our communities. And so they went on strike. 22 days, shut the port down. Basic demands. And they won a state of economic emergency from the national government and a pledge of development resources. What is so important about this struggle is that the leaders of the strike committee decided that this was a 30-year process. The concessions they won were 10-year concessions. And they realized that what they needed was a multi-generational approach to building civic capacity so that they, and these are their words, that the community could govern governance and the market and build well-being for people. One of the most interesting things about this is that the leaders of the strike committee do not see themselves as representing a particular constituency. So there are labor leaders, there are fishermen, there are artists, there are civic leaders, and when you ask, for example, the labor leaders, you're on the committee to represent labor, right? They say, what? No, I'm on the committee to represent the community. And coming from the US, from a context in which labor represents labor interests, that was really hard to understand. What does it mean that you represent the community? How could that be, in your mind, from your job, distinct from representing your interests as a labor leader? This is something that in presencing theory we call seeing from the whole. I represent the whole community. I don't just represent my own interests. I can see beyond my organization. I can see beyond my sector to what is good for the whole society. So the civic strike committees, there are a bunch of different committees, and their purpose is to guide the development across all these different sectors: education, culture, politics, economics. And they've been meeting ever since the strike ended. They went through a whole process to create, lift up a candidate for mayor, and they brought a whole bunch of civic leaders forward and vetted them in various committees to see who was the best. And there wasn't somebody declaring themselves, I'll be the leader of this. The community decided who the leader was going to be. And they chose a man named Victor Vidal, and he won in October. He won the mayoralty. So this is another disruptive moment of change. CoLab has been working with the strike committee leaders on the development process. And so the UN Habitat is the agency, the multilateral, that is pulling together a development proposal. And they did not originally have anything in the proposal on racial equity around the specific response to structural violence. And so we work with the committee to add that. And actually, to my surprise, the committee leaders asked, most importantly, that CoLab continue to do leadership development. So we had been doing that for about 4 or 5 years, and we went to the committee and said, what is the most useful thing for us to do? And they said, keep doing that. And also, if you have some extra time, help us with the development study. Okay, so these are the questions. In the context of deep structural violence, and I'm using terms that are a little bit distancing and a little intellectual, and we also know that there's deep structural violence in this country, and I don't just mean alt-right provocation. I mean the ways in which communities of color are systematically excluded from investment along all kinds of vectors. And so the question for the leaders in the Pacific, as they are for the leaders that we work with in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and in Los Angeles, is in the context of deep structural violence, how can we respond and build a civic presence, a container for innovation, and support the development of more generative alternatives? This was a prototyping session we had around development. So one of the sort of key things that the leadership development program works on is, are there alternative development models? And so that are deeply rooted in identity as a source of strength and wealth in the community. And so this one was about kind of perceptions of ethnic identity in Buenaventura. So we use Theory U in our leadership development programs. And I have to tell you that personally, when we started doing this work in Colombia, I was very hesitant to use Theory U because it felt thin and weak in the context of the threats that our colleagues were facing. And so I did not want to be the one to start that conversation around Theory U. And my colleague said, get out there and do it, and make the presentation. And talk about this technology that we know is helpful. And I was astonished by the response, and I have to tell you that now our team in the Pacific is leading our work around Theory U. So when I did my first presentation, and you know, people in the room were facing dire threats, and I'm talking about turning the beam of observation back on yourself, and you know, these technologies that seem so soft. And somebody came to me afterwards and said, you know, all we have is love. That's actually the only thing, that's the only instrument at the end of the day that can prevail here. So we really appreciate you talking about love. Okay, so let me see again, how many people are familiar with Theory U and have had some kind of Theory U training or Theory U exposure? Okay, so are you familiar with the Iceberg Model? Yeah. So the core idea of Theory U, again, is that what is happening on the surface of any social context is just a fraction of what is actually going on. And in seeking to produce a different set of outcomes, the important thing is to look at what is below the sight line, what is in the water, underneath the iceberg. Looking at patterns and structures of communication, of organization, that actually create the social situations we are in. Does that make sense? So another way to think about it is as a field. We think of it, actually we call it in theory the social field. The social field is like the farmer's field. In a farmer's field, you have bugs and roots and rocks and microorganisms and rotting matter. And all of that is the soil in which the crops grow. Yeah? So, the same is true of the social field. And the bugs and the rocks and the organisms are our histories and our habits and our cultures and our family practices and our own gestures and ideas and thoughts. And they are as material a force in shaping the interactions as in a social situation as what we can see on the surface. So a few years ago, it was the middle of the winter in Boston. Everything was frozen. And my toilet clogged. And I called the plumber, and the plumber came. It was February. And the plumber came, and he said, your problem is that the roots of your tree have grown into your pipes. I see people nodding their heads. The roots of the tree have grown into the pipes. So that was fascinating to me because the ground was frozen solid, and there were about 2 or 3 feet of snow. And he's telling me that the roots of the tree are growing. What was more astonishing is that there was no tree, because the year before, the tree had died, and we pulled it out by its roots. So I pointed out to him the obvious fact that there was not a tree. He said, yeah, but a tree has deep roots that continue to grow for years after you pull it out. I see some people shaking their heads. I had no idea. I am from the suburbs. We don't. So the tree has roots that continues to grow for years after it has been pulled out. And he said, you think it's February, but I know that actually the ground has thawed because I can smell the roots growing. And to me, that was the perfect analogy to the social field. Being able to develop the capacity to smell the roots growing is a way of, as a leader, developing a much deeper facility with cultivating a social field towards more generative outcomes. Does that make sense? So I'm going to stop for a minute, and I want to ask you guys to journal. And the question I want you to journal around, and just continue for 2 minutes, so somebody will keep time. Great. Okay. Tell me if you want. So take a few minutes to journal. When was a time when you could pay attention and smell the roots growing? And what was the outcome? Does anybody need paper? Okay. Now, turn to your neighbor, take a minute, share, and then let your neighbor share back with you. We'll just take 3 minutes, so 1.5 minutes each. Share their story. Who is willing to do that? bring this to you if I can figure out how to turn it on.
Hello, everybody. So when you mentioned, for instance, smelling the roots grow, I didn't know from what side to take it. At the beginning, I thought you were trying to say, like, this is how a conflict still persists over time. But then when you said that the ground was thawing and the roots were growing, I saw it from a more positive side. So my example was, for instance, I'm not gonna mention names, but my organization, my nonprofit for climate change, especially led by youth, was told that you are innocent, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how much time this takes, you don't know how bipartisan polarized this community is for us to really make change happen. And so we decided as our organization to research. We made a climate change proposal in which we'll show people why is this important, in which we'll show people how young people are being threatened with climate anxiety, which is a real reality for us, that by 2050 we'll be here, and a lot of people who are in office will not. But in the end, we just realized that there's so much potential, and that growing roots is really an important aspect for our organization to not lose hope and project what love is within our community.
So actually, growing roots is both. It is the roots that have been there for a long time and still continue, and that is the structural violence and the racism and the boomer denial of climate change, right? That is a serious, deep root in my generation and in earlier generations. It's, I say to my kids, we faced nuclear annihilation. We're used to this kind of stuff. And they're like, no, you don't understand. That was a social agreement that could be changed. Climate change, there's nobody to negotiate with on climate change. It is going to happen, right? That's our mental model for boomer generation, yeah? So I think that's a really critical piece, is that it is both in the soil there is everything. And it's not just nice stuff. And our task as leaders is to cultivate more generative possibilities in light of that, given the bugs and the rocks that make the soil harder to till, but till the soil nonetheless. Does that make sense? So, what is this source thing? What is that? Anybody know?
You have to get to the source in order to change the thought, change the structures. If you don't go all the way down, you don't fix it.
It's the key to the whole problem. If you don't go all the way down, you won't be able to fix it. So the source is within us. It is our own intention. Yeah? So another quick story. Are we running out of time? No. So I said I was a civil rights lawyer, and my work was to ferret out racism in voting arrangements, districts, and various kinds of voting practices relevant today. My whole metabolism was based on fighting. And the last case I did, I was deposing. The last case I did was a challenge to a black majority district that had been created because African Americans could not elect their own representatives to Congress. They could not elect black representatives to Congress. And my task early on in the case was to depose the lead witness. And the lead witness was a white woman who had been a feminist activist back in the day. And here she was, in my mind, challenging the right of black people in North Carolina, a state not known for its multiracial harmony, to vote, to meaningfully participate in the electoral process. And I was deposing her, and I was furious. I was so mad. I walked in there and I was just loaded for bear. And the theory of the case was that a black person could not represent a white person effectively, which I still think is inherently racist, and therefore you couldn't draw the districts to make more likely the possibility that a black person would be elected to represent black people. I was so mad at her. I was mad at her. And I was deposing her, and the claim, well, it doesn't matter what the claim was. Anyway, and so the question I was asking her was, how did she believe that black people had a right to a voice? Yes, she believed black people had a right to a voice. And did she understand that white people did not vote for black people in these districts? Yes, she understood that. So what it came down to was then a numbers game. How many black people was too many black people in a district? At what point was she offended by the percentage of black people in the district? And I started just hammering on her. Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 50? Is it 60? You tell me, what is the percentage that you can't live with? And I'm yelling at her and I'm pointing my finger at her. She breaks down and starts crying. Now there are two things I want to say about this, because I'm channeling my children right now who are telling me not to let people off the hook. So the first thing I want to say is that she was my grandmother's age. And when she started to cry, I felt, it still upsets me to this day, I felt like I was disrespecting my grandmother. And that I had, that my grandmother, if anybody had treated my grandmother that way, how I would have felt. On the other hand, she had agreed to this very toxic mindset that was standing in the way of something that was really, really, really important to me and to the community I represented. It's why I stopped practicing law, actually, because I could not figure out the way inside the law as a practice to reconcile those things. I just couldn't figure out a way to get beyond it. The law was such a blunt. Is anybody here a lawyer? Do I see any hands? There is no, okay, so raise your hand, that's great. Raise your hand high. Brother, raise your hand high. You're a lawyer, it's cool. Are you a litigator? Okay. He's not a litigator. But anyway, I stopped practicing law because I wanted to do something that was more generative. I'm talking about this because I'm talking about the source. The source for me in that moment, being able to step back and say, whoa, that is me savaging my grandmother. It was a profound shift in my awareness that made me realize I was feeding something I did not want to feed, and that I could no longer do that kind of work that just compelled me to feed that thing. And so the first thing in terms of the work of the leader is to have that capacity to turn the beam of observation back on ourselves. Here I am, savaging my grandmother, and I don't know it. And then I can step back and say, whoa, that's me, doing something that I no longer can justify doing. That make sense? So a lot of Theory U focuses on turning the beam of observation back on ourselves. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But for the purposes of kind of structural change, the question is, how do you translate that into a systems change practice? And so, but let me stop. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, yeah.
Can I read out my story?
Oh, sure.
First of all, to introduce myself, I'm Dorothy Krause. I am on the Dane County Board. I'm also a Fitchburg Alder, and I'd like to welcome everyone to my city.
Thank you.
What I wrote, and I've written this a number of times, and I think it really, really hits the source of much of our social unrest, says our society is working exactly as designed to favor the white majority, particularly male, and the affluent, and oppress all others. We need those others to rise to the surface.
So, to your point, is it Dorothy?
Yes.
My mother's name is Dorothy. We've got too many things here. Okay. So, in the social context, not in the individual context, and we're going to go back and forth between those two things. This is a schematic of the social field. So remember, the social field is that matrix that brings forth social relations. And it starts here. It's the quality of the soil. So what does that mean, the quality of the soil? It is actually it begins with the sort of the aggregate inner conditions of the individuals in the room, in the space. And how those individuals come into the space, speak in the space, listen in the space, act in the space, is how they co-shape the social reality and create relationships. So it is in the way we talk to each other that we begin to form the social space. Are we listening? Are we rude? Are we aggressive? Are we kind? Are we empathic? Are we curious? So that's the quality of the relationships. So you start as a set of individuals, and through the ways you interact, you create this social soil. And it's the quality of the relationships that actually have the power to change the patterns. So you start with the pattern, the patterns are kind of the tools, the intervention points. You can, I could have stopped and been curious about this woman. It wouldn't serve the purpose of my litigation, but I could have stopped and been curious about the woman. And at the end of the day, that's what produces how you speak, how you organize, how you plan, how you listen and interact in the space, is what gives rise to the results that you create. So it is because the strike committee spent days and days and days cultivating an awareness that we are in this for all of us and not for any one of us, that they were able to put forward a really strong mayoral candidate in a space of extraordinary political corruption and vote buying and intimidation and violence. And win. Because people had spent so much time creating this social field of solidarity and resoluteness and determination to change the conditions in the city. that they could not, despite the vote buying, despite the intimidation, they couldn't be deterred. It was because it began here. Does that make sense? Okay. This is the part of Theory U that we are only now really beginning to explore and develop. So much of our work has been on the interior condition, which is still the key tool for any given leader. But beginning to understand how it connects to the social condition is really critical and a new area of work. Yes?
Can I share a story?
I work with circles of support, and that is exactly what we do, what is inside us. And then when I listen to you talk, I grew up on a farm, and you don't want to go towards and dig the ant hill because it's so strong to dig. But trust me, it's the best part of the farm. When you do any plant there, it's the best source for everything because of what's happening in there. So it's difficult, but let's go towards it. And the results are outstanding.
I love that. It is difficult, but let's walk right into it. Let's dig our hands all up in it. So this is a lot to put on one slide, but I really want to kind of walk through this, just hear what you think about it. So I think in terms of shaping more generative outcomes, there are 4 critical pieces that a Theory U practice can help with. So the first is helping the leader smell the roots. Help the leader discern the architecture, the structure, the feel of this matrix, the social soil. And once you see it in front of you, you can see ways of intervening to shift it. Does that make sense? So that's the second thing is, so once you see it, you can shape it. So how do you shape it? How do you actually intervene to change it, to move it in a more generative direction? How do you develop the capacity to do that? Then the third thing is the critical role of the leader in sharpening and honing her own ability to shape it. So first is to be able to see that you can shape it. The second is to know how, and the third is actually to practice it and to be aware of it at all times, turning beam of observation back on yourself. And the last thing is then to cultivate the collective capacity. So to my mind, those are the 4 really important dimensions of this sort of awareness-based leadership practice. Make sense? Any questions about that?
You had said something that felt so important to me when you came in about making room for anger in the midst of where it's sometimes hard, in the midst of talking about mindfulness. And I'm wondering about applying this and also your comment about anger to the story in Colombia. And what I'm sensing is this, in the story about yourself as a litigator and that moment where you felt yourself ravaging a woman whose humanity then in that moment she cried became apparent to you. What I sense in that, and perhaps your desire in that moment and beyond, was something about utilizing the force of anger for the good, not the kind of anger that paralyzes people, keeps them locked horns together, but sort of utilizing that energy of anger for change, but still cradled in the knowledge of people as whole, someone worthy of respecting. And I'm wondering if you have any examples about how you might have seen that in your Colombia story.
That's how this ends. Thank you for that. We are getting close on time, so you've given me a way to skip forward. Okay, so that is actually how the story ends, that our work in Colombia, our colleagues are really spending their time figuring out how do you kind of titrate between love and rage. That's actually the question. Love, rage. And for the individual leader, constantly working with yourself to be focused on, this is me now, what is the quality of my attention, I'm going like this and saying smell the roots, of my attention and my intention. How am I attending to this woman with compassion, with empathy, with curiosity, and what is my intention in this space? Am I here just to, extract the information from her, or is there some other purpose? And so, always working to align towards your deeper intention. And, I was a civil rights lawyer because I wanted more justice in the world. Yeah. And then, this is the space of the field. This is the opportunity at any given moment to go in either direction and constantly to choose. And so as a leader, understanding that you have that capacity to choose. And at any given moment, you can make that choice. In 1 minute, you can be really pissed off, and then step back. One of the exercises I've been doing lately is I see white men who look scary, who could be Trump supporters. What do I know? I'm just saying they look scary and they could be Trump supporters. That's all my own mental model. And I just stop and I say, somebody loves that person and they love somebody. Now the truth of the matter is, that sensibility could put me in danger at some point because there are really dangerous people out there. But making the choice in that moment to just decide, I'm just gonna go with love and humanity, see what happens, I think is the basic instinct that I'm talking about. And so in this space, it is constantly cultivating curiosity and an open heart and courage to step more into humanity and away from objectification and reification. Okay. This is all. I want to get to the exercise, and I want to tell you how this story ends. But this working on your own intention is what our colleagues in the Pacific say is the space of highest potential for them, because it enables them to have a perspective on how violence is inside of them, how they are reproducing the systems of thought that hold the community back, and how they can affirm humanity and still fight. And so I want to be really clear in saying that when you are living in the context of deep structural violence, and by that I mean institutional neglect, disinvestment, and physical violence, your thinking can't eliminate those threats. It's not that you are, it is not that you have created all of this and that you can eliminate all of this. It is just the stance you bring to your social change work and the invitation that you embody to create a different kind of a collective. Does that make sense? I don't want to, this is not about blaming the people who are ourselves experiencing the violence. It is just to say, as humans with agency, we have choices, and how do we make the choices in spite of the violence? That's really the question I want to get to. And so our colleagues work a lot with this idea of the social field and really training the leaders that they work with to sense, to understand, to perceive the social architecture and to see the ways that it can be, through their interventions, be changed. And collaborative innovation, that is the generative space. That is the space where something new can be born. So this tension between love and rage, if you love, then you will be enraged by injustice. And the task of the leader is to not let that consume who you are as a leader. And to work through that rage, to think about collectively how we address injustice, in part by bring about a culture and a context in which people are acting from something different than rage. So I wanna, too many things going on. Okay. So there, that is kind of the matrix of choices that we have as leaders. And I am telling you, that revelation that I had about that woman has not stopped me from being enraged on a regular basis. I'm mad every day about Trump. I'm mad every day. But I do understand this space I have. And that the core drivers of that space, of what creates that space within me, is my own ability to look at myself and to use a set of simple tools. So that I can be turning the beam of observation back on myself. And so I just I want to tell you what, so here's the other side of it. When you are constantly faced with injustice and violence, actually, what is the work of turning that into something other than rage? And I just wanted to tell you some of the insights that our colleagues in the Pacific have kind of turned over in their work. So first, I said this before, being able to turn the beam of observation back on ourselves allows us to see the system within us. It gives us an interior respite from the violence. That was really profound to me, that once you recognize that you have that space, it's actually like an internal peace, an internal sanctuary that you can retreat to know that you can make a different set of choices. It allows us to connect to the things that affirm our own identity, apart from the violence. And in the context of the Pacific, it is our deep Afro-Indigenous cultural patrimony. That is a source of strength and survival and a nourishment that moves us to something other than violence. So can we take 5 minutes? I want to just talk about the tool. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. The tool of listening. Because the two things you really have as a human is your listening and your seeing in social interactions. I know, I have 5 minutes. So, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with these, even if you've not seen Theory U. It is downloading, you already know everything, it's just the same old pattern over and over again. Or maybe it's, well, I've been there, but I can step back and see that there's a different approach. Or maybe it's, wow, somebody loves that person, and that person loves somebody. That is a human in front of me, even though they look scary. And the last kind of listening is listening for the highest possible future possibility. What if we had a development regime in Buenaventura that provided healthcare and education and clean water for every person in the town? What would it take us to get there? And what if Afro culture really was celebrated and recognized officially in all of the institutional channels, not just in our communities, in our community spaces? And so this is really the simplest, most elegant, and most difficult task of the leader. To develop these kinds of listening as the starting point, as the creator of that space, to enable us to choose more generative futures. Thank you.